today, the First Lady, and she's expressed a desire to sing our song. So, here's how we do it. I hope Gary hasn't forgotten the tune. I hope you haven't forgotten the words. I hope I haven't forgotten the words. And I hope you haven't forgotten the words. One, two, three. Take me out to the mall. Me out to the mall. Buy me some.
The Monday Morning Quarterback on the 19th of November 2018, beaming from WBRN Radio and on the Boston Red Network. This is a very interesting week coming up. Of course, we have the Turkey Day holiday, which is a traditional holiday in North America, in the U.S., that is celebrated fictitiously, of course, as a gathering basically of families. It began in New England with the natives or Aboriginal tribes there in New England, and extended since that time. A lot of mythology around it, of the natives giving food to the quote-unquote settlers who gave them typhus, smallpox, etc., took their land, brutalized them. It's a bloody situation. And we always have special programming where we look at working people on that day around the Gratitude Day, not in a religious setting, but in a secular setting. And we have various stories to commemorate the day. I'll get it out in a minute here. That particular day. And we also now on the 25th, which is a Sunday, special programming. It would be a Jerry Pippin, the late great Jerry Pippin's 79th birthday. It is his birthday, the 25th of November. He was born on the 25th of November 1939. He died in 2015. So as we broadcast from the Jerry Pippin broadcast booth, and on with our Monday Morning Quarterback, we'll go over last week what happened. Most of the elections are over now and where we are. Look at the presidential approval ratings. We also have a feature on a book called The Green Book. Now, this is not Colonel Gaddafi's book. This was a travel book used by African Americans to travel in the South during the apartheid era in this country. An interesting book, and there's also a movie out by the same name about that particular era. And we'll have a report from the organization NPR under the Creative Commons. We'll use it in a little bit of the trailer. We'll just fold it into the broadcast, and after we are done here, we'll have some analysis from Face the Nation, some new congressional types that just got elected. Evidently, this week was also orientation. Now, some of the new representatives did not have an opportunity to be there because the races had not been decided, but they were there, and they were interviewed on Face the Nation. It was kind of interesting, the number of progressive people that ran. One fella out of Colorado, he was endorsed by Bernie Sanders. And there was another lady out of Pennsylvania, I believe, Hollander, that had been in the military. Diane G. was pointing that out. A number of these women have been in the military, and would their service in the military shape their outlook? Well, that would obviously depend on the person involved. Many people in the military, at least during the Vietnam era, did not necessarily see the military in the best light because of the conditions that they labored under. Now, in different types of military situations, more recently, unless you're stuck down in Texas, guarding the border, so to speak, without electricity, without running water, and basically dealing with we used to call C rations, and now they're called MRIs or MRAs or whatever they're called. Anyway, they are packaged food that's dehydrated or some process of that nature. They're not getting the normal mess hall type of food, which is most unfortunate, and they're on a mission that they're really not needed to be there at all. There was an article, this is from Tijuana, actually this is from Telsor, they are Ecuador. Anyway, from the south of the Americas, on the mayor of Tijuana, and how he was saying disparaging things about the caravanners, that they are there, and that is a border crossing. On the other side is the city of San Diego. So we look at that. Let's just start this out with, of all things, Bitcoin. Why Bitcoin? Well, there's been a lot of interest there. It sunk to a 13-month low on today. The biggest cryptocurrency touching 517. Wait a minute. Hold on, excuse me. Let me look at this again here. Actually, it's $5,173.23. This is a Bitstamp platform. Now, there are various platforms out there, so we have to be very, very careful of which one we're talking about. At one time, Bitcoin was up to $10,000. Haven't followed as much there. Bitcoin, was down 5.2%. at $5,270 now. And other lesser coins, including XRP, endured a sell-off last week, with some blaming fears at a hard fork. What that means is these exchanges would be splitting in a Bitcoin Cash, where smaller coins that split into two separate currencies could destabilize others. In the world of programming, we talk about a fork when one particular project evolves into a different project, so the project is divided. It just simply means it is divided and is forked. While we're on things, let's go to the Brexit situation in the UK. We sort of get some of these little things here. The PM there, May, is trying to seek some business support. This is the separation of the UK from the EU. The Prime Minister will also insist to business leaders that her withdrawal deal has been agreed in full. It comes as, of course, there's some Tory MPs continue to press for late changes to the deal. Ministers from the remaining 27 EU countries met in Brussels ahead of the deal being finalized on a Sunday. They're working on the political declaration and setting out the future relationship with the UK. And this story has been changing all weekend. There's been widespread criticism of the deal. This 585-page withdrawal agreement Two of the Prime Minister's cabinet members have already resigned. There is talk of removing the PM. May will join the Labour leader, that is Jeremy Corbyn, in addressing the business lobby group, the CBI, at an annual conference in London. She will tell them that her plan will provide a fair immigration system that will help younger people in the UK get jobs and training. She is expected to say it will no longer be a case that the EU nations, regardless of the skills or experience they have to offer, can jump the queue, the line, ahead of engineers from Sydney or software developers from Delhi. Instead of a system based on where a person is from, we will have one that is built around talents and skills that a person has to offer. She will also reiterate that she is not willing to reopen discussion with Brussels over the withdrawal agreement, saying that the core elements of the deal are already in place. I'm reading incidentally from the BBC. She is due to say that she expects to hammer out the framework of future trade relationships in Brussels this week. And let me get down here. Why people are unhappy. The document sets out terms of the UK's departure, including how much money will be paid to the EU, details of the transition period, and citizens' rights. The transition period, which lasts until the 31st of December 2020, will mean the UK is officially out of the EU, but it's still abiding by most of the rules. During this time, the two sides hope to negotiate a permanent trade deal. The UK and EU want to avoid a hard Northern Ireland border, whatever happens, so that they can agree to a backstop. Describes insurance policy by the Prime Minister aimed at achieving this. If the sides cannot agree on a trade deal, a backstop would mean Northern Ireland would stay more closely aligned to some EU rules, which critics say is unacceptable, and the whole of the UK would be a single customs territory. So these are some of the things spinning around here. It changes from the EU's side. Their Brexit negotiator called all parties to remain calm and focus on future agreements. What were the developments over the weekend? The Commission has proposed, we already talked about that, the 31st of December to 2022 as the ultimate end date for any extension to post Brexit transition period. Key Brexiteers group of Tory MPs have published its rebuttal to the draft plan, saying it would make the the UK a rule taker. The Labour parties, that is Mr. Jeremy Corbyn, says that his party, which has 257 MPs, will not support the deal. A poll of the 505 Tory conservatives found more were against the deal than for the deal, but the majority want the MPs to back the Prime Minister May. In Scotland, the First Minister, that is Nicole Sturgeon, confirmed her MPs would vote against the deal. So that is that part of it. So let's roll on here and we'll get the approval rating while we're trying to get some of these little minor issues out of the way, and we'll get the presidential approval rating. And let's see where we are here. we'll do the Gallup one. And that approval rating goes at YouGov is at 45. I guess we'll do that. Reuters at 43. And it would go to the Gallup people are the Cadillac, Mercedes, or whatever. This was on a Monday, the 12th. There's not been a lot of polling since the election. Anyway, the approval rating was at 38. And let's see, then we had the 14th. So we really don't have a lot of to work on, period. And we won't go into some of the antics of DJ Trump because he's had so many things going on around him, his trip to California and various other things. We will get into E.J. Dionne. I just saw this, the Supreme Test of Nancy Pelosi. And back to the discussion at the, or on, I should say, Face the Nation, with these new installed legislators that will start in January. The interesting thing is they were supportive of Nancy Pelosi. Now, for progressives and a number of people, there is a belief, I guess I will call it, that Nancy Pelosi's days are numbered as the leader in the House of Representatives. And new leadership is necessary. Now, she had previously said if Hillary DeMoss Clinton had been elected in 2016, she would have moved on from being the leader because then a woman would be installed in a leadership position. Now, this is E.J. Dionne. He's writing in the Washington Post. And he is a liberal. Without Nancy Pelosi's toughness, focus, and legislative skills, there would probably be no Affordable Care Act. Her speakership during the Obama presidency left a legacy of achievement in other areas as well, including a far-reaching reform of Wall Street regulations and massive economic stimulus that helped save a collapsing economy. There's no doubt about that, but also at the same time, the deal worked out under Pelosi for the Affordable Care Act did not go to single payer, and they had the votes, or more or less had the votes, and could have went to single payer. So there are some things here. It would be hard to find a more effective fundraiser. We wouldn't argue there. But remember, a lot of these funds that they raised, particularly for these Democratic candidates, were from the corporate business sector. The grassroots people, she would have not had a hand in that. She just led her party to its largest House gains since 1974. Someone as canny and experienced as Pelosi would seem the natural choice to lead the House of Representatives that will, for at least 2 years, serve as the only check on a debased presidency and a Republican-led Senate. Oh yes, there was obviously no alternative to her leadership. There are many reasons for Pelosi to overwhelmingly the choice of House Democrats to return as Speaker. So what's the problem? Problem number one, the rules. If the Speaker were determined by caucus vote, she would easily win. But on January 3rd, the first vote of every member of the House will be for a new Speaker to win. A candidate needs a majority, 218 if everyone votes, and fewer if some members abstain or stay away. Pelosi's Democratic opposition has the power to vote for someone else in January, and they may be able to muster enough support to leave her with a plurality but not a majority. This would create a deadlock and lead to multiple ballots until someone wins a majority. If you want to plunder the nightmare Democrats hope to avoid, consider it took 133 ballots before Nathaniel Banks was elected speaker. Now, this is in 1856. No one expects anything that dramatic, but a few rounds of voting would court return to clinch the headlines. Democrats in disarray. Number 2 problem, Pelosi, after years of attacks from the Republicans, polled barely enough, but some freshman Democrats promised votes so they would oppose her election as Speaker no matter what. There appear to be 9 incoming freshmen who made hard commitments to vote against her. The 2008 national exit polls, which we don't use, only 31% of voters had a favorable opinion of Nancy Pelosi, while 56% had a negative opinion. Tim Ryan, he's from Ohio, who ran against Pelosi for minority leader in 2016. He got 63 Democratic caucus votes to her 134, argues that this is just not smart strategy to burden the party's candidate with a leaders whose polls so badly. Now, another candidate that comes out here that used to head the Black Caucus, Marcia Fudge, who hasn't entered it yet. She's an African American. The Pelosi's defenders reply that only a weak and foolish party would let the GOP onslaught influence its choice. Republicans vilified her because of they fear her effectiveness. There's no doubt about some of that. Her supporters are not shy about calling out her opponents inside the party as sexist. Well, that's not necessarily true. Problem number 3, not all of them. The top Democrats in the House are old in the party and increasingly relying on younger voters. Pelosi is 78. That's not a big problem. DJ Trump is 72. Clyburn of South Carolina and the number 2, Steny Hoyer, is 79. Well, your problem is in any party, you want to start a transition from the older leadership to a younger leadership, and that happens in some left parties. In the CPUSA, that happened, that some of the leaders held on into their 80s and some into their 90s, and then there became a void. You had some leaders that were in their 60s, and then you virtually had, as Tommy Lasorda used to say, it's Sutton or nothing. Sutton, of course, was a pitcher. But that becomes a problem where you're not cultivating leadership. When the experienced leadership retires, dies, or whatever, then you're left many times with inexperienced leaders, and that is a problem within itself. A former House staffer, not associated with the Pelosi camp, noted another factor that may work in her favor: frustration and concern amongst some new members that the party might bog itself down in a divisive, inward-looking struggle when it should be focused on legislating. There's no doubt about that. And dealing with DJ Trump, Pelosi understandably is reluctant to become an instant lame duck by promising to leave by the end of this term. But she frequently describes herself as a bridge figure, pointing to how this content is likely to be resolved. Democrats need her experience now. And this has been a campaign we've seen over the years in many campaigns that people are running for, say, a House seat or more likely a House seat, and they have had previous experience in state legislatures, and they say, well, we are better suited to move up to the Congress than someone that's a young person that has very little or no legislative experience. The voters many times don't look upon that period. They also need the promise of change. Here is betting if someone can figure out how to bring these clashing impulses together and also survive Trump's Twitter Sunday morning endorsement. It's Pelosi. Think of this as the supreme test of her wizardry. Anyway, she is there. No doubt, low approval ratings. And we at this mic would venture that much of the low approval ratings are not necessarily related to Nancy Pelosi as a person, but as the victim of these constant attack ads. Because many people under 40 really don't know who Nancy Pelosi is. That is more common towards people that are 50 to whatever, the deathbed, let's just say that. Other people that would look at, say, Nancy Pelosi as the constant liberal, no doubt. But how progressive is Nancy Pelosi? Well, Nancy Pelosi's been around a very, very long time. She's out of Baltimore. She's out of a political Catholic family in Baltimore, moved to San Francisco, got into politics out in Frisco. So that's part of the legend of Nancy Pelosi. Will she continue on? Well, from what we've been able to ascertain, unless some people obviously get their act together, she probably will retain the position. Now, the Steny Hoyer, he should be gone. And Clyburn, out of South Carolina, James Clyburn, he's the assistant leader of some sort of strange situation as number 3. As an African American, to take that type of role is in 2018 is simply silly. He should have held out for number 2 or nothing. And that's part of the problem when you get into outdated political selection. So these are some concerns, at least we have, how things will be going forward here. Now let's move on. I think what we'll do right now, we'll just fold in this the Green Book, and it's very, very small here. That the travel book for African Americans, will put it in, and
that chronicles a prominent black musician and his white driver's tour through the Deep South in 1962. The title comes from a popular and essential guide that told African American travelers where they could eat and sleep in the Jim Crow era. Karen Grigsby Bates from our Code Switch team reports on an effort to preserve the real Green Book's mostly hidden history.
We take the nation's highways for granted now, but it wasn't all that long ago that long-distance travel was done on 2-lane roads. For black travelers, a lot of those roads went through lonely, hostile territory. So many people relied on a guide called the Negro Motorist Green Book. Antonio Relaford grew up in New Jersey and remembers the meticulous preparation it took to get from his home in Newark to his relatives in tiny Colquitt, Georgia. It was like mapping a military campaign.
Everything was planned out.
His family would leave with other family members in a multi-car caravan, safety in numbers, and use the Green Book to find safe places to stop on their 18-hour drive south. The book listed black-owned motels, restaurants, even gas stations with bathrooms for black patrons.
Usually it was typically by the side of the road there because, again, there was a problem in finding facilities that would allow us, and then the ones that would allow us, actually you had to pay a token to get in.
Oh, and the gas pumps in many southern towns, those were segregated too.
There were lines where you knew which gas was. It would actually say colored gas.
The Negro Motorist Green Book was created in 1936 by postal worker Victor H. Green. Green started in Harlem, where he lived, and eventually included recommendations for every state in the country. The book highlighted hotels and rooms in private homes, basically the precursor to Airbnb, restaurants and services that were all black-owned or black-friendly. It was recognized as an important resource by the United States Travel Bureau, part of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce.
This was kind of the 20th century version of the Underground Railroad.
That's Brent Leggs. He directs the African American Cultural Heritage Action Fund at the National Trust for Historic Preservation. The fund is working to highlight the importance of the Green Book during segregation.
This annual travel guide was the Bible of black travel.
Jim Crow wasn't swayed by how famous or how rich you were. You could be an internationally acclaimed artist, but if you were black...
You could not have accommodations at a white-owned motel. You couldn't eat in a white-owned restaurant.
The Green Book movie shows what happens when celebrated pianist Don Shirley, played by Mahershala Ali, tries to join his driver, played by Viggo Mortensen, for dinner and is stopped at the door.
This gentleman says that I'm not permitted to eat here.
No, you don't understand. He's playing tonight. He's the main event.
No matter. No service. Right now, says Brent Leggs, the National Trust is celebrating the role of Route 66 as a beloved national road. And because the Green Book had a few motels along the route, there's another purpose.
It's also to uncover this hidden story related to Green Book sites from Chicago all the way to L.A. And one such place that still stands today is the Dunbar Hotel in Los Angeles.
In a documentary about the Dunbar's history, Mrs. Bessie Robinson recalls why the elegant hotel was a necessity.
There weren't very many accommodations for blacks at the time in the way of hotels.
So artists like Duke Ellington, Billie Holiday, Lena Horne, and Count Basie not only played the Dunbar, they stayed there too. With the passage of the Civil Rights Act in 1964 and the gradual erosion of segregation, most of the businesses in the Green Book quietly disappeared. About 3% remain physically. Brent Riggs hopes this new movie will increase interest in them.
As a preservationist, it's exciting because we can leverage this movie and its attention to celebrate the actual physical sites related to the Green Book.
Celebrate and remember. Karen Grigsby Bates, NPR News.
A doctor, he's looking for a driver. You interested?
I am not a medical doctor. I'm a musician. I'm about to embark on a concert tour in the Deep South. What other experience do you have?
Public relations.
Do you foresee any issues in working for a black man?
You in the Deep South? There's gonna be problems.
Promise me you're gonna write me a letter.
No promise.
That was a little bit of the trailer from the Green Book. One little point here is the disappearance of African American hotels and motels. Our music director, former music director, I suppose, L.A. Bill Graham, parents used to actually own, and the establishment's still there. They don't own it anymore, but it was an African American owned hotel. You don't hear very many of those. You hear motels, You hear hotels, but not motels. This was a motel. Anyway, the whole idea, and this is what happened in Major League Baseball, when Jackie Robinson broke the color line and African Americans were allowed into Major League Baseball. Well, you had African American leagues out there at the time called the Negro League, and those disappeared. And that was an unfortunate situation. That's what happens when people look at a political interest and not their economic interest, and this was the problem. The Civil Rights Movement, and it was a forked operation also. If you recall, the March on Washington was about jobs, period. It was not necessarily about going to a shop or restaurant owned by some European. So those were some of the problems there. You can have a political immigration, and this is much of the thing what happened in South Africa, but you don't have economic integration, and that is a big problem within itself, and it still is here today. The whole idea of integrating people of color into the national economy, and that has been a standoff situation. The number of African businesses, we had a video I was looking at some Chipotle restaurant in the Midwest, where some African American men were not given the food in the line because the manager claimed they had been in the night before, and they obviously had not, and did not pay, so they wanted to pay first, whereas other customers, the European customers, did not have to do that. They paid later. So these are things that are out there, and they come and they bring their ugly head. We'll do the sports in just a minute here. We had a segment on Julian Assange. This is from a Politico. I won't go into the whole thing, but the whole thing about him, some liberals, it says, have defended Julian Assange as a journalist. Conservatives celebrate him in 2006, and Trump once declared his love for WikiLeaks. The apparent criminal charges against Julian Assange are thrusting the WikiLeaks founder into American politics. He's Australian, incidentally, a development that could create an awkwardness across the political spectrum. Many liberals and civil rights activists have defended Julian Assange as a journalist entitled to First Amendment protection. Conservatives have embraced him for exposing the emails of Hillary and Clinton. DJ Trump declared his love for Assange. This website during the 2016 campaign, and this whole Russian probe here is mixed up in it. And let me just finish this up here. Legal experts caution against drawing conclusions about the nature of any charge the Justice Department might bring against Julian Assange. I don't think we should assume this is Russian related. That's from Matthew Miller. He was in the Obama administration. U.S. officials have been considering bringing charges against Julian Assange since Chelsea Manning. That was in 2010. Seamus Hughes, a former counterintelligence official now working at George Washington University, first discovered the reference to the charges. This is every lawyer's worst nightmare from Samuel Bullen, a Duke University law professor and former federal prosecutor, who said the disclosure looks to be an enormous cut and paste. Well, that does happen. There's some cutting and some pacing here. Period. And a bunch of people commenting. Several former federal prosecutors said Assange could be a gold mine of information for Mullen if U.S. officials were able to expedite him from the Ecuadorian embassy and ultimately flip him into a government witness. Well, we'd see about that one, but it's very difficult. Period. The activities by Donald Jr. Stone, that's one of, and others to exploit the legally hacked emails and disseminate them for coincidental purpose of aiding Trump's own political goals and enabling a Russian influence in the election. From Rento Moretti, he's a former U.S. assistant attorney. He could reveal important information to prosecutors, not just about Americans who work with WikiLeaks to commit crimes, but also about foreign intelligence services. This could be just really a trap. Let's go to the sports now, and we'll do the NBA, NHL, and college football scores over the weekend. And we'll start with the National Hockey League. This is, after all, the Monday morning quarterback. Oh, wait a second here. Oh, okay, we do have an action here. There we go, from the National Hockey League on Sunday night. The Stars were at the Islanders. Stars at 6-2 over the Islanders. The Devils were at the Hurricanes. Hurricanes 2-1 was the final there. The Wild and Blackhawks in Chicago. Blackhawks 3-1 over the Wild. The Golden Knights and the Oilers. Golden Knights 6-3. And finally, the Avalanche and the Anaheim Ducks. I've always liked that name. In an overtime, it was the Avalanche 4-3 over the Ducks. And now to the National Basketball. Celtics were at the Hornets. Oh, oops. For some reason it always wants to jump forward. Now we'll get it in a minute here. To the games not played yet. The Grizzlies and the T-Wolves. The Grizzlies 100-87. The Lakers and Heat. Lakers 113-97. The Knickerbockers and Magic 131-117 for the Knicks. The Trailblazers and Wizards in D.C. Trailblazers 119-109. And finally, the Warriors and Spurs in San Antonio. Spurs win 104 for the Spurs and 92 for the Warriors. That's early in the season, so we won't look too much at that. And the scores. I think we gave scores from Friday night. Boise State and New Mexico. It was Boise State 45-14 over New Mexico. And then we had Duke and Clemson. It was Clemson 35-6. Syracuse and Notre Dame. Notre Dame 36-3 over Syracuse. Indiana and Michigan. Michigan 31-20. UMass and Georgia. Georgia, boy, it's a basketball score. 66-27 for UMass. Kansas and Oklahoma. It was Oklahoma 55-40. Rice and LSU was LSU 42-10. Arizona and Washington State. Washington State 69-28. West Virginia and Oklahoma State. Oklahoma State 45-41. Very close game, 4-point game. In overtime, Ohio State and Maryland, the Terrapins there. Anyway, 52-51, a 1-point game. And it was in overtime. Maryland, of course, is on right. Cincinnati and UCF. It was UCF 38-13. Idaho and Florida. Florida 63-10. I guess Idaho, the consolation prize they got out of the cold. Penn State and Rutgers. Penn State 20-7 over Rutgers. Iowa State and Texas. Texas 24-10. Middle Tennessee and Kentucky. Kentucky 34-23. Oregon State and Washington. Washington 42-23. Utah and Colorado. Utah 30-7. Boston College and Florida State. Another 1-point game. Florida State 22-21 over Boston College. Arkansas and Mississippi State. It was Mississippi State 52-6. And Northwestern and Minnesota. They were ranked 22. It was 24-14. And Utah and Colorado State. Utah 29-24. So those were the NCAA football scores over the weekend from Friday night to Saturday. So it was the 15th and 17th. That is the sports. Now let me just check here. We're running a little over. We'll have a little bit of we'll get a little bit. This is from Variety. CNN turns to Sam Donaldson to boost the case for Jim Acosta access. Well, we don't have to worry about that now. He's now back in. Acosta is back at the White House as it filed a suit challenging the Trump administration. Didn't mean to say Trump administration. The revocation of Jim Acosta's White House hard pass. Turn to a reporter who stood out in his era. Sam Donaldson used to be with ABC News. He signed a sworn statement in support of Acosta, in which he characterized the White House action as unprecedented. He quoted Harry S. Truman in suggesting that the motivation on the part of Trump and his team were related to the type of questions that Acosta asked. President Harry Truman has summed up the necessary interplay between the president and the press corps when he advised government officials at every level, if you can't take the heat, get out of the kitchen. Donaldson, of course, is now 84 and lives in New Mexico, said in a statement. Donaldson and Acosta are kindred spirits. During the Reagan administration, Sam Donaldson was on the case. I believed then, as I still believe today, it is my duty as a journalist to seize those opportunities, Donaldson said in his declaration. I was aggressive in posing questions and pursuing answers because the job of obtaining factual information from and about the public servants. I covered the job as if I did it as well, that it contributed to holding the government accountable to the citizens of the country. But he noted that in his career he never used his credentials, revoked or not, was then even ever the remote threat to do so by a presidential administration. White House officials were free to complain to me or my employer about my coverage, and occasionally they did, but never was there a move to silence me or demand that I report a story differently. In the declaration, Acosta said, without a hard pass, it would not be feasible to me to continue my current position as the chief White House correspondent for CNN. He also said, without that, my reputation and my future career prospects have all been significantly harmed, if not completely devastated. If my credentials are not restored immediately, I highly doubt that I will be able to work as a White House correspondent for any news outlet the rest of my career. He's incidentally, Mr. Acosta is Puerto Rican. He also said that he now receives death threats regularly aimed at my work of covering the president. This frightens both me and my family and requires us to take additional security measures in our daily life. This will do it for us from the Jerry Pippin broadcast booth. We go, and we'll be celebrating, incidentally, Jerry Pippin's birthday on the 25th of November. Have a good week, everyone. Good day.